All right, but it is 7 o'clock. We are at the Milwaukee Makerspace, which means it's time for Model Monday. This is continuation of the beginner class that we started last week. Last week we drew a key, a warded key. I 3D printed mine just because it's easy. And this week we're following that up by drawing the warded lock. So the lock part of our key. So if you did not join us last week, it'll be fine. We'll be drawing our wards by hand instead of using our key to draw our wards. So when we get to that part, we'll make it work for everybody. I promise. All right. So I am going to start with by opening my key document. I've got a component here named key. If you don't have a key document, you can just start a new document. And in that new document, you're going to create a new component. A component is a series of bodies and sketches that kind of make up a part. And when we have a multi-part project, so we've got a key and a lock, and I'd like to be able to animate those and move them with each other. You got to have separate components in order to animate and move things. So we're going to do this all with separate components. So we'll go ahead and just click on Create. I'll mention here too, I've got my main document as my active component. I should get my magical pointer tool out here. So I've got my main document as my active component. You can see this little radio button here is highlighted. If my radio button was here on my key component that we made last week, then when I go up and click on Create a new component, it would make that new component inside of my key component. And that is not what we want. We want to make our new component in our main document component, if that makes sense. All right, so create new component. My favorite thing to do is naming things in Fusion 360. Naming things is important. Otherwise, you get confused. And you will start to hate past you like I often do. Future me never likes present me. All right, so we're going to name this new component Lock. You can call it warded lock. You can call it literally anything except for component 1 or 2. Those are bad names. All right, so our lock component here, I'm going to start by creating a sketch inside of this lock component. So I'm going to click on Create. We'll go down to Create Sketch. And I'm going to make this lock component sketch on the same sketch that I made the drawing for my key. So right in the middle of my key, kind of bisecting my key in half, is this plane that we started our sketch on. If you don't have a key, it doesn't really matter what plane you start on. But I'm going to click on that plane. So I'm looking right at the side of my key. And now, if you're fortunate enough to have a key that you've already got drawn, you can simply use the project command to transfer the geometry that we've got over onto a new sketch. So in our Create menu, there is an option called Project Include, and then inside of that is Project. And I'm just going to select that key shape as the thing that I want to project, or the geometry here that I want to project. And then I'm going to say OK. Now, if you don't have a key shape, you could draw this. So it doesn't need to look exactly like this. It just needs to be a rectangle shape. That's roughly key-sized or oversized key size. And the slots here are where our wards are going to go. Ward is the name for those dividers in the key path. And you can draw them in any way that you would like. So you could draw a series of 3 of them and make it like the letter E, and you could change the heights of those. Let me just draw an example over here off to the side, just real quick. So we could just have I made mine 3/4 of an inch, I believe, by 1. And we could just draw a series of rectangles here of varying sizes, and that would be a totally sufficient worded key. I would, of course, define some distances here, so it'd certainly be helpful to know, define this distance, define the thickness for my wards, and the length. But if you're just trying to get a key shape done real quick, that is an easy way to do it. Step 2 is going to be drawing the actual wards here. So now we've got our key in there, and now we need to draw the geometry that represents the obstacles, the actual wards here. And the way that I'm going to do that, now you could just draw a rectangle here, right? And say, all right, cool, that shape is going to be, eventually we're going to take this geometry and we're going to revolve it around the center point. So I'm going to take this geometry and revolve it around around the center point, and that's going to create the paths, the revolved paths for my key to travel through. However, astute people will notice that if the object that you're trying to fit through something is exactly the same size as the object, that will not work. Those walls literally exist at exactly the same point, and you can't have things that exist exactly the same point. So we need to have some sort of tolerance here. We need a little gap, in other words. And in order to create that gap, I am going to use the offset command. So in the modify menu, there is an offset tool, and that offset tool allows us to select some geometry and then define an offset. So I did, for the key that I made before class here, I did an offset of 0.02, and I actually think that was too much. So I'm going to cut that in half to 0.01. That is 0.01 inches, because we tend to draw in freedom units in this class, because that's how my brain works. Because even though Gerald Ford tried really hard to get us to use the metric system in 1973,
I think,
or 74, 75?
I don't know.
Gerald Ford, he was really trying. I give him props, but it didn't work. Because all us American kids like me were too dumb to use the metric system. All right, so let's go ahead and draw now that we've got that offset in there. We can create some rectangles. And I'm just going to loosely put some rectangles in here using my offset as a reference to locate my rectangles on here. You will see that they are not the same length. And we're going to fix that later. All right. So I'm just going to I'll draw one more. We'll draw this word too. All right. Now that we've got our rectangles in, Let me take a pause and see how you guys are doing with your rectangles.
Whoa.
Yeah. The infinite space of a computer, man. So trippy. It's like I'm falling into Tron or something. All right, so now what I'd like to do is to specify some distances here. Normally, when we specify distances, we do it when we're drawing the rectangles, when we're drawing the geometry. But you can also specify distances or dimensions after the fact. And that's what we're going to do right now. So from the Create menu here, I can choose the Sketch Dimension option. And I just want to define a distance that represents the distance between the farthest reach of this ward here to that line right there. If I click on both of those things in succession, then I have this dimension that I can place. And once I place that dimension, then I can specify what that dimension is. And I believe I wanted this to be 1/4 of an inch. That looks about right. I'm going to do that. I could do that same thing to define the distance for the other word that we have here. However, maybe a more efficient way to do this is to do this with constraints. A constraint is a rule that tells your sketch how to be your sketch. How can I be the best sketch? How can I be my most sketchy sketch? And the constraint that we're going to use here is the horizontal vertical constraint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose this horizontal vertical constraint. I'll specify a point on the bottom of this rectangle, and then a point on the bottom of that rectangle, and now that pops into place. So the reason I say I think this is a little bit more efficient is I'm inevitably going to want to change this measurement at some point in the future. Past future me is going to go, hey, past Carl, that shouldn't be 1/4 of an inch, that should be 1/8 of an inch, based on a test print that I made, or whatever the case may be. And if I were to specify dimensions twice here, if I were to do this 2 times, I'd have to change both of those dimensions, whereas now I just have to change the one, and the other just follows along. So just kind of stays coincident. Using rules to define the distance can be really handy, for sure. All right, I'm going to do that over here in this section as well. So I'm going to create a sketch dimension between that point and this point here. And this I am going to make 1/8 of an inch. I think that'll be fine. All right, once we've got our wards drawn, we can draw the rest of the shape here that's going to kind of close in our revolved shape. And the rest of our revolved shape is basically going to be a rectangle here. So I'm going to grab my rectangle tool. Let's use a bunch of constraints here to make this rectangle be the rectangle that we want it to be. So I'm going to make my rectangle oversized. And now I can come back and choose from my constraints menu this coincident option. And I can make this top line coincident on this point. I can make the line to the left here coincident on one of the lines off to our left. I can make the line at the bottom coincident on one of the points at the bottom of our ward here. And I can make the line at the top coincident to that top line as well. And again, this using constraints, using rules to put our rectangle in place, allows us to make this still easily changeable. So now if this is, hey, that's got to be a half of an inch, don't worry, those rules that tell how the sketch how to be the sketch are going to be followed there. So less dimensions, more rules, kind of make things easier to change. All right, so that is our shape that we're going to revolve here. And I'm just gonna take a little pause here and walk around, start my recording. And now we just need to revolve our shape. So from the create menu, I'm gonna go ahead and choose the revolve option. The objects that I'm going to revolve here are going to be those shapes that kind of surround my key there, the wards that I'm going to create here, the axis that I'm going to revolve around. I can click on any cylinder here that is part of my key, or I can click on an axis. I'm just going to click on this cylinder here. My revolve has defaulted to 90 degrees because I was preparing for class and did this a couple of times. So we actually, you will probably start out with a revolve that is 360 degrees. And you actually don't need your wards to go that amount. 90 degrees is just fine. And we are indeed making a new body. Now, I suppose it could be that your extent type is set to full. If your extent type is set to full, it will not allow you to choose an angle there or amount of degrees. So we just have to change our extent type from full to partial, and then it'll let you choose that extent type, or choose that number of degrees, and then I'm going to say OK. All right, the next step here is I'd like to, I suppose we don't need to do that, do we? Let's just focus on what we need to do. Let's draw the back part of our key. Here, we've got a body we can name. I got a bodies folder, and in that bodies folder, I've got a body called body 1 that I am going to rename to wards. And we've got a sketches folder. I'm going to go ahead and name that sketches folder, or that sketch, the same thing. I'm going to call it my wards. And now I can turn off that sketch because I don't need to see it anymore. Now let's go ahead and make the back of our key here. So from my create menu, I'm going to go ahead and choose to create a sketch. And I'm going to create that sketch on this surface right here. This surface is the topmost surface of my key. It's kind of like the end cap of my key here. And because that's a circle, I'm going to go ahead and choose create, and I'm going to create a center diameter circle here. And I'm just going to draw a circle right at the center of my world and make it the same diameter as my revolved circle there. I actually don't need... Yeah. We're going to leave it a full circle. We're going to leave it a full circle for now. And then the center of that circle, I'm going to draw one more circle that is 1/4 of an inch. That 1/4 of an inch circle corresponds to the pinhole at the end of my key here. This is kind of like a locating mechanism on these worded keys. So you slide it in, and that pinhole is kind of what you revolve, what you rotate the key around. And once I've got those two circles made, I'm going to go ahead and say finish sketch. Now I can come up to my create menu and I can extrude out that shape. I'm going to make it 1/4 of an inch. It probably doesn't need to be that thick. It could probably be 1/8 of an inch. That would probably be just fine. But I'm going to make mine 1/4 of an inch, and I'm going to make it a new body. So because these bodies, because I'm extruding out this body and it touches an existing body, the default here is to join these two bodies together, the body that we're making with the body that we've already made. And I don't actually want to do that. I want to make this, instead of a join, I want to make it a new body. And then I'm going to say, okily dokily. Alright, I've got one more sketch to name. This sketch is my, I don't know, let's call it back stop. And this body, this is also my back stop. It's the part of the key that, or the part of the lock that stops the key. That makes sense to me. There are probably official names for all these things that I did not take the time to look up. That is because I am leaving it in your hands to learn that knowledge. Now you can come back and say all the things that you have learned. Or you can just move on with your life, so that's totally acceptable too. Alright, how are we doing? We've got we've got a lock and we've got a key. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to close down my lock and key components just to kind of minimize them on the left-hand side there. And I'm going to make my main document my active component again here. Look, I've got an extra joint there. We're going to make that joint now. All right, so I got two objects and I want them to rotate with each other here, just to kind of test this rotation. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to click on the assemble option here and the assemble menu, and I'm going to choose to assemble an as-built joint. And in this, as the two components that make up my as-built joint, I'm going to choose my key. I can either pick the key here in my drawing view, or I can pick the key in my browser on my left-hand side. And then as the second component, I'm going to choose my main document component. So my key is going to revolve against the world, I guess you could say, as opposed to my key revolving against the lock. My key is going to revolve against the world. The type of motion that is going to be, it may start off with rigid, but we actually want to choose a revolute joint. And now I can choose any round part of my key as the snapping point. The snapping point is that going to place that little flag down there. So I can put it anywhere that's easy to access. So out here it's easy to access that flag, versus back here it might be kind of buried inside of some bodies. So I'm going to choose to put it back here. And there you can see a demo of my key rotating there. I can hit the play button and it'll just play that again. Play it over and over again. So that is indeed the motion that our key is going to perform. And I'm going to say OK. Now the reason to do this is to kind of have some inspection here. So if I click on this little flag and I rotate it, so my key is intersecting with, it is interacting with the lock. Now I want to see if I have any issues here, if it's overlapping at all, if I've got anything that's too close. I could do that by kind of giving it the old eyeball and kind of looking at it. But probably a more effective way to check for that overlap is in the construct menu, in the inspect menu, if we choose the section analysis tool, I can click on the face of my key here, and I can indeed see that there is a significant amount of overlap going on between my wards and my key here. And that is because the revolve that we did happens from the middle of my key, and my key has thickness. The key was made with an extruder, so you're going to have overlap there because the extruded shape extends out front and back of our shape that we ended up revolving. Long story short, the way to solve this problem is with the press pull tool. So I'm going to make my lock my active component one more time. I'm going to turn off the visibility on my key for now. And I'm just going to go and kind of systematically take my press pull tool from my modify menu, and I'm going to pick the items that need to be pressed or pulled inward or outward there. And I'll start with 0.05, and I'll say OK, and now I can turn back on my key, and I can see if my problem was solved. So I've solved some of my problems. Solved the problems at one side of my key, but I need to solve the problem down here at the bottom as well. So I'm going to turn off the key again. I'm going to grab that press pull tool one more time, and I'm just going to choose to press these guys inwards. I think these need to go less. I'm going to do 0.25 this time. And now I can turn back on my key and say, hey, look, that was great. Nice. So now I've got a set of words that fit a key really nicely. If my press or pull did not work, what's kind of nice now is, now that it kind of turns off the key. I could right click on my feature timeline down here at the bottom. Down here I could right click on it and say, oh, that wasn't quite enough, or that was too much. And I could edit that feature. I could change that amount to something else. And there we go. So there is our warded lock, warded key. Make my main document my active component. We didn't quite have time to make a latch in this class here. I'm not going to try to cram a latch into 2 minutes of time here. But I leave up to you, I challenge you on your own to see if you can make a latch. Basically, the way that I envision this latch working is, you can see this key rotates here, and it would rotate until it hit that latch, and it would push that latch over, and then you'd be able to lift up your top. So the pin here would be attached to the bottom part of your chest full of gold bullion, which is what you put in a chest, right? Gold bricks. So your chest of gold bricks has got this pin in the bottom half, and then the latch part is in the top half, the opening half of your box. And this 3D printed latch is all you need in order to keep your gold bricks safe. I'm certain that there's no way this is completely foolproof. I guess I imagined having a spring here in some way, shape, or form. Maybe a leaf spring attached to our latch, just to kind of force that latch back in place, or to keep it in place from shaking out of place there. But there we go. There is our warded key and our warded lock. I'm going to try to do more like two-parters, something where there's something beginner friendly that we can do in a beginner class, and then like take that a little further in an advanced class.
Think about how tired you.
But you know, that may or may not happen. I know it's nice for people to be able to just pop in and join us for one class and not feel like they had to come last week. So hopefully this wasn't a pain in the butt for you.
No,
You
it's
didn't
fine.
feel like you had to be here. And I will say goodbye to everybody in the recording land and see you next week.